Welcome to the YAHOWAH blog. I'm your host, Craig Winn. This evening, we're going to do the first part of what will be a multi-part series on one of my favorite books. It's called Coming Home, A Voice. It's volume 1 of this series. And what we're going to explore is David's songs. They're better known as David's Psalms, but they are Mizmor. Mizmor means lyrics to be sung, and they were composed by King David, who lived almost 3,000 years ago. And as we listen to what he has to say, we will be taken to the very precipice of heaven's door. There is no more impressive person in all of the world. There's no more articulate or brighter man who has ever lived. Quite simply, David is the most interesting man in the history of the world. The purpose of these programs, and there'll be many more like it, is to share with you via these audio blogs what I have learned by translating David's songs and by sharing with you the insights that can be gleaned from them. And in the process of doing that, my intention is to invite you to read all of the books that I'm going to share from, including this one, Coming Home, are available in their entirety at the YadaYah.com website. YADA means to know. Yah is the familiar form of Yahweh's name. So YadaYah.com will have all 35 books. Coming Home, you'll find right there on the bookshelf at the top of the page. They're all available in their entirety for free. So you can read them, you can bookmark them, you can search them. There's an index for other passages that you may be interested in. There's another search bar. There's timelines, everything you could possibly want, including access to all of the various social media sites that we now have available to present this message. So the purpose, again, is to encourage you to read, because God has so much to share, and the more you know, the closer you will be to heaven. So this brings us to the realization that Father and Son, Yahweh, and his beloved David are returning on Yom Kippurim, the day of reconciliations, in the Yobel year of 6,000 Yah. Well, do you know their names? Are you prepared to meet them? Do you know when, where, or why this is all going to occur? Will you be there? Now, the author of the first Mizmor psalm is issuing an invitation to those who want to celebrate with him. In the process, he is revealing insights which are, I think, quite cathartic, indeed transformational and profound. And he is positioned to share these kinds of insights with us because the lyricist is quite literally the Son of God. He is a Nambi, which means he's a prophet, and one of the first order, maybe the single most prolific of all the prophets. And he is Hamashiach, the Messiah. David is the exemplar of Yisrael, representing the good and the bad of his people. Yisrael means individuals who engage and endure with God. He is also the exemplar of the Bereth, which is the covenant family relationship. And while that's a stout beginning to a worthy resume, the opening chorus of this first song reveals that what he has said and done is of benefit to those who are willing to disassociate from religious rhetoric. You have to separate yourself from and disengage from the platitudes of the political. and you ought to stop listening to the confounding babble of all who are conspiratorial. Having done so personally, Dode knew the joy associated with being liberated from these controlling and degrading schemes. He was prepared to lead those answering his invitation to this same fortuitous place. Therefore, the most extraordinary individual in all of human history is speaking directly to us and is offering to walk with us along the straightforward and correct path that gives great meaning to life. Although there is a caveat. There is a prerequisite, because his invitation is only for those willing to forego the caustic and disorienting influence of religion and politics, as well as conspiracy. It is not a coincidence that this same condition serves as one of the covenant's lone requisites. His guided tour away from mankind's pervasive schemes to enjoying Yahweh's company is through the Torah. And while Torah means teaching, this is not strictly an academic exercise. Our guide lived it, and to a greater extent than even Moshe, whose name means to draw out. You may know him as Moses. And of course, it was Moshe who contributed to writing it. Realizing that Moshe endured 40 years herding cantankerous and contentious Jews through the wilderness because, well, they were too religious to enter the promised land, to claim that Dode, who is the beloved, lived the Torah to a greater extent than Moshe, the one who draws out, is a revolutionary notion. But it's true. And he will prove it. And when you discover why, it will change your life. But before we go there, a word about that other name, Yahowah. Well, he just happens to be El, God. Despite what you may have been told, his name is readily known and easily pronounced, just as is his Torah. When he introduced himself to Moshe, he revealed that his name was based upon the verb haya, which when spoken in first person means I exist. Immediately thereafter, God answered Moshe's question regarding his name by saying that he should tell the children of Israel, Yahweh is my way of being known and recalled forever. If you're curious as to how that conversation played out, I would encourage you to listen to our 3-part series on the name of Yahweh. They're all posted here on Facebook, on X, on YouTube, and on Rumble. If you are not yet among those who know his name, who accept it, and who use it, which would include everyone who is religious, then you are not part of his Bereth covenant family. And therefore, you are estranged from God. Should that be true for you, then you're going to want to pay especially close attention to what Dode, David, has to say regarding his invitation to walk with him and to benefit from him along the path to Yahweh. It is interesting that the only controversial sound in Yahweh's name, the Wah, is the vowel in Dode's name. Daleth, Wah, Daleth. Daleth in ancient Hebrew was drawn in the form of a doorway into a home. Dode provides the door to heaven and the door to life. And the Wah sound is what makes it Dode. It means beloved in Hebrew. Of course, Yahowah, Yod He, Wah He, the Yah is pronounced exactly as it is in English, and the the He sounds, both the first and the latter letter He in Yahweh's name, are pronounced as they were in Haya, the verb that Yahweh used to introduce himself to us, just as they are in Torah. And that leaves us with the Wah, which comes through brilliantly in Dod's name. And now a word about our guide. Yes, his name is Dod. Daleth, Wah, Daleth. It means beloved. He and his father, Yahweh, will demonstrate beyond any doubt that the author of this Mizmor song deserves every accolade bequeathed to him. These titles include Ben, Son of God, Ben El, Son of God, and Hamashiach, the Messiah. Now, you have probably heard that somebody else claims the title Son of God and somebody else wants to be the Messiah, although they use a Greek corruption of that title as Christ. I'm telling you that Jesus Christ fellow is nothing but a counterfeit. Counterfeiter, Dod. He was a fable. Dod is very real. God tells us twice, actually 3 times, that Dod is his son and that he is his father. And he anointed Dod 3 times, just as Dod would live 3 lives. In Rabbinic Judaism, the Hasidic are still awaiting an unknown Messiah to come save them. Well, Messiah has a name. He's Dod. He's been here twice before. And when he returns, he will eliminate all of those who are religious. So everyone has this wrong. Yes, one of the great insights that I'm going to share with you is that according to God, and he ought to know, Dod is his firstborn son. He is the Ben El, the Son of God, and Dod is Hamashiach, the Messiah. He is also Bokor, the firstborn, Malak, king. Turns out he is also our Yasha, Savior. Now this distinction was earned the hard way during his second of 3 lives among his people. You, like many, are likely aware of some of what he accomplished as the king of Israel. Considering how his legacy is discounted and is misappropriated in religious circles, I suspect that there is much that you do not know about why Yahweh chose Dod, why he anointed him 3 times, beginning at 8 years of age, or why the Ruach spirit enveloped him and never left him. Dod's life, his lyrics, and his loves were tumultuous. They were also cerebral and emotional, brilliant, and sadly at times also dim-witted. He was courageous and on occasion even cowardly. He was the man. He was every man. He was much more than a man. Dod's return to endure Chag Matzah, which is comprised of Pesach, Matzah, and Bekurim. Pesach is Passover, Matzah is unyeasted bread, and Bekurim is firstborn children. They are the first 3 Moed Mikre. Moed is a restoring witness to the eternal testimony. Mikre is an invitation to be called out, to be welcomed, and to meet with God. On behalf of his people, in the Yobel year of 4,000 Yah, Dod boldly and irrefutably not only proclaimed that he would fulfill the Mizmor, but actually did so. His foretelling of what he would do permeate his Mizmor because he was a Nabi. They are also included throughout the Psalms, or out the prophets, particularly Yashayah, who has a great deal to say about him. when you read Yeshayah 9, particularly at this time of year, as we are just a few days from what we we're part of the covenant called Shitmas, this Babylonian holiday that is based upon the winter solstice. That what we learn is that there is no truth whatsoever to it. But if you read, as I have translated for you, Yeshayah 9, and even the 8th chapter that leads up to it, what you'll find is that God specifically named Dod. He told us that every word of it was about Dod. Dod is the child who was born. He is the son who was given. He is every word of that prophecy. But the first references to Dod don't start under the prophet Yeshayah, who wrote several hundred years after the end of Dod's first life. They begin in the Torah. You see, in the 18th chapter, one of the most powerful chapters ever written in any book, but it's in Dabarim. It not only tells us how to avoid false prophets, how to identify those who are truly speaking for Yahweh, but it specifically speaks of Dod, who is the one who would come and come again and again. Fewer than 1 in a million people are aware of Dod's heroic and altruistic second coming. And even then, knowing what he has done for us is less important than realizing why he volunteered to do so and how it was accomplished. Admittedly, the clue Dod has provided with the first word of his initial song is far more subtle than I have been up to this point in this introduction, but it is based upon Ashri. Ashri is a compound of Asher, which is to benefit from the relationship, and Ani, me. Asher is among the most expressive words in the Hebrew lexicon. Asher is the word that Yahweh used when he introduced himself to Moshe. Ihaya, Asher Ihaya. I am who I am for the benefit of this relationship. I exist to show you the way to the relationship. As a verb, noun, name, relational pronoun, participle, and conjunction, Asher speaks of being blessed and of becoming joyous by receiving the benefits of the relationship. This occurs by walking along the correct path to living life to its very fullest, to ultimately standing safe and free. You'll notice that this is a live broadcast. We are live streaming as we do every program. I think it provides a great deal more authenticity to what we do. So with these lights turned on so that the camera can pick up the video feeds with the islands in the background, you can just see I was bombarded by a ruthless mosque. Moth hit me right between the eyes. But this is the nature of doing this live for you. But again, I think this is the best way to present what God has to say. I've lived this material, studied what Yahweh has revealed to us through the prophets for the last 23 years, devoting anywhere from 10 to 14 hours a day, 6 to 7 days a week to this, filling those 35 books with insights on your behalf. And so I'm in a position to share it with you as naturally, as comfortably, as comprehensively, and as often as possible. By including the first person singular, Annie, I, me, and my, with Asher, which, by the way, is my favorite Hebrew word. In fact, the yellow lab that is making noise there at my feet, she's even named Asher. So it is one of my favorite words because it was the first word I translated in Hebrew. And the very fact that it is the first word that led me to translations now that would fill 20,000 pages. And it's the first word that Dode chose to open his first song, I think is special as well. So by using Asher with Ani before it, Dode is revealing that we can travel along this path together to a more fulfilling and joyous existence, all while he shares the benefits with those who join him, join us along the way. As we read further into this initial pronouncement, we find ourselves being drawn away from religious rhetoric and political platitudes, and then directly to Yahweh's Torah. Once there, we are encountered and by God, really, and encouraged to ponder the implications of his teachings day and night. Collectively, that's an amazing opening salvo from the most remarkable of men. So here are the words Dode scribed for our benefit. And before I read them to you, I'd like to share this with you. This is a voice. This is volume 1 of the 3-part series, 3 volumes dedicated to the Mizmor. I'm just beginning to write the 4th. This one, called Kol, a Voice, begins where we are beginning with the first Mizmor. So I will continue to share this with you and would encourage you. Read it free online. If you want to buy it royalty free at Amazon, you're welcome to do that as well. So here is how the first Mizmor that Dode wrote, the first psalm, begins. Joyful with me and blessed by me, Ashri, fortunate in the relationship with me, stepping along the straightforward and correct path which gives meaning to life with me, providing the proper place to stand and to live as a benefit. It's a compound, as I've shared, of Asher to benefit from the relationship and Ani, me. So joyous in the relationship is the individual who, as a result of the relationship and this prosperous life along the correct path, does not walk. He does not journey through life in the counsel of those who are religious, nor incorrect, in the advice of con men advocating religious schemes through his rhetoric and the criminal promotion of a revolting authority figure with a plan causing those who believe in it to be unjust, immoral, and condemned as guilty. Does not stand, is not present in the way of those who are misleading, chata, of those who should be ostracized for leading people astray and causing them to miss the way with their errant platitudes. He neither sits nor dwells. He is neither established nor inhabits nor settles down, remaining in the company, in the place, congregation, or dwelling, in the seat or position of power of those who babble, of those who are confounding by their scoffing and ridiculing, of those who cause derision through contempt and jeering, arrogantly mouthing a rebellious interpretation. Oh, that's the first statement of the first song that Dode wrote, Mizmor 1:1. He continues. Instead, and by contrast, within the Torah teaching and guidance of Yahowah, which is an accurate transliteration of the name of Elohah, God, guided by his Torah instructions regarding his Haya existence and our Shalom reconciliation, is what is valuable. And that is what matters to those who are, by contrast to the religious. His source of meaning of being and pleasing, and he is accepted such that it is, these things are pleasurable and pleasing to him. And then Dode wrote, and in his Torah directions and instructions, he meditates, giving serious thought and consideration to the information so as to speak decisively. He reads and he ponders, thinking intently, and then he makes conclusions. Following that by roaring out what both belongs and does not, doing so day and night. Mizmor, lyrics to be sung, Psalm 1:2. Now, as we ponder the expansive implications of what we have just read, we find ourselves being called into Dode's company to celebrate with him and benefit from him. While he has done all of the heavy lifting, we can walk alongside, appreciative of the role that he has played in fulfilling the Mikra, these invitations to meet with God. This is how he was able to bless those who accompany him. I am Asheri, overjoyed that Dode began his literary love affair, celebrating his relationship with Yahowah and his Torah, using the same word that brought us together 23 years ago, as I tried to make sense of a prophecy found in 2 Samuel 7. It is, to this day, my favorite prophecy in the whole of the Torah and prophets, and it is one of the most expressive. It is about who builds homes and who lives in them. As we have learned over the intervened time, Asher defines the proper path to the covenant relationship while also expressing its purpose. Those who are blessed by Asher in conjunction with father and son enjoy the benefits of being part of the same family. They are elated for having been favored through this association, having taken the proper strides to live a productive and prosperous life filled with joy. Asher is the correct, albeit narrow and restrictive, straightforward path which leads to abundant life. Asher gives every aspect of our existence meaning. Those of us who, like David, become God's sons and daughters, do so by making an Asher-like connection between Yahowah and his Torah, literally walking to one through the other. In his opening statement, our shepherd, our Messiah, and our returning King encouraged us to join him in walking away from religious advice, from being misled politically, and from being confused conspiratorially. In Israel, I should say, today, this requires every Israeli to be distinctly different than they currently are, to walk alongside David through the Torah guidance to Yahowah. The religious must toss out their Talmud. They must discard the Zohar. Their depressing black outfits and ridiculous kippahs have to go away. They must silence their prayers and refrain from rituals, disavowing all of their mitzvot and halakha and come clean. There isn't a single rabbi or any member of the Haredi cult who knows Yahowah or who is part of the covenant family. And frankly, almost all are too marinated in religious rhetoric to recognize or accept the truth, even when offered by God. Religious Jews embody the attitudes Yahowah finds the most despicable. They claim to represent him and to speak for him when they are the most clueless about Yahowah. Now, on the other side of this spectrum, progressives in Israel are no less indoctrinated, ignorant, and irrational. The inverse of what they have been led to believe is most often true. Having forfeited the ability to be judgmental through a reasonable evaluation of evidence, they have squandered any hope of walking alongside Dod to Shamayim. American Jews and diaspora are similarly lost. 1/3 have denied their ethnicity, preferring to be known by their liberal politics. 1/3 play religious dress-up and live in an intellectual ghetto of their own making. In between, there is hope, albeit fading. For those secular Jews who are not progressives and not religious, it is time to realize that race does matter, and that it's a great honor to be a descendant of Abraham, of Ishak, and Jacob. It is a tremendous distinction to be related to Moshe and to Dod. However, for being Jewish to be beneficial, Judaism must be eliminated from this equation. While those who are prepared to be harvested remain few, the next harvest being Shabuah, less than 2 years from now, so long as those whom Yahowah is interested in knowing are willing to listen, our lives will all have been well lived. It is for you that I translate and share, shining a light on the path Father and Son have provided to bring you home. If you are not a Yehud, Jewish, you are welcome to attend the party. You are encouraged to read along as we explore what God revealed in his Torah teaching throughout his Nabi prophets. His words will change your life. They are enlightening, enriching, emancipating, liberating your soul as you are brought into the covenant family. Should you want to save the date, and it would be wise to do so, Father and Son will arrive in Jerusalem at sunset, which will occur at 6:22 p.m., October 2nd, 2033. This is the day of reconciliations in year 6000 Yah. It's the 120th Yovel year. The covenant family will be affirmed and will be restored. In fact, they will also be returning with the Messiah and God. And they will be greeted by a mortal remnant of Israelites who will have taken advantage of the sacrifice of the red heifer. This occurring on Towrah. Yes, the covenant family will all be affirmed and we will return. Coming home is a more recent addition in this regard to the books that were first published over 20 years ago. This journey of discovery began with exposing and condemning Islam and Prophet of Doom, which I have shared is now been rewritten. It's gone from 1 volume to 5. It's now over 4,200 pages with every verse of every surah translated, rearranged chronologically, set into the context of Muhammad's repulsive life. And I did so that Jews might more successfully fight the terror this religion inspires. Next, I would compose Yada Yahowah. There are 8 volumes. An Introduction to God, of which there are 5 volumes. Questioning Paul, which was once 4 volumes, has now been rewritten and represented as Twistianity. There are 5 volumes in the series that disproves everything about the Christian religion. There was no Jesus Christ. The New Testament is absolute rubbish. And I don't say those things just to be inflammatory. I say them because I prove them to be true. And if you read Twistianity, you will be convinced it is impossible to read those 5 volumes and to remain a Christian. Just as it would be absolutely impossible to read goddamn religion and have any respect and in any way possible tolerate or encourage anything that has to do with Islam. Observations was next. There are 5 volumes. They pursue a course through Dode's Mashal Proverbs and then journey through the most magnificent of prophets, my friend, Yeshaya, Isaiah. And then there are 3 books that detail the 2 that were written in Babylon, Daniel and Ezekiel. In them, I not only disprove rabbinic Judaism, but I completely dispel any myth that Daniel was a prophet or that Ezekiel was a prophet. In fact, Ezekiel is actually Satan's autobiography. The 2 volumes devoted to that book is a real eye-opener, particularly for Jews. Everything about it is untrue. There will be no Gog from Magog. There will be no Valley of the Dry Bones. There will be no third temple built as such a monstrosity. There'll be no restating and restructuring the 7 Moed Mikre. The book of Ezekiel documents 25 ways to kill Jews. There are 2 ruthless rape scenes in the midst of that book. And the presentation of the Lord throughout that book is of Satan himself. The last in the series is Coming Home. It is the ultimate conclusion of the work that I have undertaken for the last 23 years on behalf of my Father and his Son, my King, your King, if you choose to join us. As I began translating Yahweh's testimony from the Dead Sea Scrolls and sharing the insights derived from what he revealed, I considered myself irrelevant. I would still like to, but God does not. He has a great deal to say about this endeavor. In fact, I would tell you that third only to what he has to say about Moshe and Dode, this particular mission receives more prophecies regarding it than any other. There are so many titles and references to this particular job. That's why this particular book that I'm sharing from right now is called A Voice, Kol. It's one of the titles that Yahweh has afforded to the role I'm playing on your behalf. Bashar Herald is another. Choder, which comes from the 11th chapter of Yashaya. Nakar and Nakri, which means observant foreigner. Ed and Ida, meaning restoring witness. And finally, Zeroah, the third of three, the one cultivating the harvest. God wants you to know about our collaboration so that you respond to what you're hearing. Now, that said, every book that I have written, some 35 thus far, is without royalty in printed form. So it's going to cost you nothing other than some time to discover what I've discovered about Yahowah and Dowd. And whatever time you invest in this journey from man's world to God, it's going to be returned to you with dividends. Now, I realize that if you were to devote 3 hours an evening to reading these books, it would take 365 days before you reach the end. And even in having read them once would not be enough to transition from knowing to understanding. But it would be a giant leap in the right direction. Jews, unfortunately, have been conditioned to labor within the constraints of Jewish law and to pay the rabbis. It is a bankrupt equation. What father and son are offering is also free for the accepting. It's your choice. By way of introduction, I've shared this before, but I'm not a scholar. I'm not a theologian. If I were, God could not have worked with me or through me. Nor am I associated with any religious or political institution. I'm anti-religious, as is God, and apolitical. And yet I have devoted 10, 12, 14 hours a day, 6, sometimes 7 days a week. And should you say, wait a minute, you can't be working on the Shabbat. Well, I would tell you that the Shabbat is when God does his best work. For example, the next harvest, Shabuah, is on a Shabbat. The harvest after that, Towrah, is on a Shabbat. The sacrifice of the red heifer on behalf of the mortal remnant of Yisrael, yes, indeed, on a Shabbat. Shabbat is a verb, which means it's active. The first day of forevermore, as we entered the garden, returning to what Yahweh intended for us, once again, is on a Shabbat. When Dowd's soul was burdened by our guilt, and he carried it into Sheol, depositing it there so it would never be seen again, making us perfect before our Father. He did so on a Shabbat. Therefore, it's important for you to know that this is a labor of love. It is my life. It is the life that I have chosen with my wife. We live it every day, and it is now our great joy to bring it to you through these video programs. And over the past 22 years, 23 now, of exploring Yahweh's revelations, I've come to enjoy God's company. I benefit directly from what I'm learning, and I share what we've discovered along the way in anticipation that those whom Yahweh is interested in knowing will learn the truth about him, appreciate what he is offering, understand what he expects in return, and then will respond appropriately. Everything you need to know to accompany the Son to the Father is contained in these words and in these pages. And speaking of knowing, it is germane that you are aware that it is especially meaningful that Hamashiach began his first song with a variation of Asher. As it relates to Yada Yahowah, it was in Shamuel, listen to him, 2 Samuel 7:11, where I was trying to correctly translate Asher when we were brought to the prophecy introducing Dode as the Son of God, as our returning king. Quite literally, Asher is the first word I translated 23 years ago, and it became the impetus for the 5 million words which have followed throughout the YAHOWAH branded books. If not for Asher, this YAHOWAH-based series would not exist. As we commence, you will note that my translations are all amplified, providing you with a more pertinent source of information, more complete than you will find anywhere else. Additionally, I make a practice of including a transliteration of the most generic form of the Hebrew words underlying the text itself, so that you can look them up. That way you can verify their meaning. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm giving you the means to validate everything I'm sharing with you. So many have done it previously. And after looking up hundreds upon hundreds of words and saying, yes, when I copy and paste that into any one of many Hebrew English dictionaries and lexicons, that is indeed the translation. That is an accurate rendering of what the text says. That rather than stop after they have verified that I am telling the truth, they continue to do it because the process is enriching and it helps us feel more comfortable with the words that YAHOWAH chose to convey his nature, what he is offering, and what he is expecting in return to us. So in light of what Dode just revealed, at the beginning of his first Mizmor, how is it possible that there are over 3 billion Christians, almost 2 billion Muslims, and millions of religious Jews ignoring what he wrote? Dode opened his prophetic repertoire by firing a broadside that blew right through the faithful's keel, undermining Peter and Paul, Akiba, and Maimonides, Muhammad, Christianity, Judaism, Islam. They all wrongly claimed that the Psalms were inspired by their God. And yet the Messiah and the Son of God shattered everything they have written by saying that we ought not to walk in the counsel of those who are religious and misleading. The very Torah they sought to annul, to augment, and to abrogate, to call by a different name, is advocated as the means to avoid the confounding ridicule of the religious by the man who was the closest to God. Peter and Paul established Christianity by going to war against the Torah. Akiba would misrepresent it at the outset of the Jerusalem Talmud. And Muhammad paid lip service to Dode and to the Psalms while contradicting both. As for which of these three has been the most caustic to God's people, we may have to wait for their trials when YAHOWAH judges and condemns all three men, along with a host of others. Unwilling to listen to God, who created man in his image, these men created gods in their image, and thereby failed all of those who would believe them. In the first sentence of the first psalm is a punch to the gut of the faithful. First, do not walk in the counsel of someone who is religious and thus incorrect. Second, do not stand with a person who is wrong and who leads people astray. Third, do not sit or dwell in the company of an individual who babbles incoherently with their presumptuous interpolations and divisive ridicule. Fourth, after disassociating from such individuals or institutions, desire and delight in, find great pleasure in Yahweh's Torah teaching, giving his Torah guidance serious thought and consideration, doing so day and night. The very man at the center of God's plans centered his life on the Torah. He pondered its implications, he weighed its benefits, so that his decisions were sound, and we should do so similarly. Dode's best-known psalm is the 23rd, where the shepherd speaks of his shepherd. But his most important is actually the 119th, which is his longest, which he shared with us how to properly observe and understand and benefit from the Torah, writing 22 refrains of 8 sentences each in alphabetic order, beginning with the Hebrew Aleph and going letter by letter through the alphabet. Yes, Dode understood the Torah. And don't think for a moment that the Torah includes anything other than Yahweh's teaching, the books he revealed through Moshe, the rubbish that rabbis study under the name Talmud, who they, for their own self-aggrandizement, counterfeit Yahweh's term Torah to suggest that they are Torah students, and studying the Torah is absolute rubbish. They're studying their own tripe under the Talmud. Now, these same recommendations that Dode has shared with us as the initial conditions of his initial song are also the conditions of the covenant. We're asked to walk away from man's influence and then come to trust and rely upon Yahweh's guidance. The beloved's inspired advice is the antithesis of what Rabbi Akiva, Paul, and Mohammed have promoted. So we should acknowledge that Dode began his soliloquy for God's people by telling them what they would have to avoid and disavow to walk with him through the Torah to the Father and into Shamayim. Before we draw the obvious conclusion, it should be noted that Etzah, the deliberate counsel, advice, and determined purpose in Dode's opening lyric, speaks of a single individual, while those befuddled by him would be many, with Rasha, those who are religious and incorrect, presented in the plural form. Therefore, based upon these two words, we are dealing with a con man acting as an authority figure, advocating a religious scheme which draws from a pagan past and causes those who believe him to be condemned. Similarly, Derek, the way or path, exposes the methods of one individual, while his victims, the chata, those who are wrong and those who have been led astray and have missed the way, would be many. Then reinforcing this realization that this is addressing a particularly misleading and extremely influential individual who is negatively affecting the lives of those who would allow themselves to be influenced by him. Moshab, the place, company, and assembly that this religious authority hails from, denotes a unique individual again. While those he causes to let's engage in confounding Babel and deriding ridicule are countless. Therefore, this statement that we are witnessing, we see a single perpetrator with many victims. Since this would be inclusive of all three religious founders, Paul, and make no mistake, the first 14 books written in the Christian New Testament weren't the Gospels. They were Paul's 14 letters. It was only after Paul's death that Mark, who Paul specifically influenced to create a gospel that would support his caustic letters, that it was written, and Luke was Paul's attaché, his personal healer, his propagandist. And he wrote Luke as a hearsay account, as Mark was. Neither Luke nor Mark knew anything about what transpired in Jerusalem some 3 decades before, almost 4 decades before they put pen to parchment, actually, in their cases, probably codices of papyrus. And so it's Paul that is the founder of Christianity. And then, of course, Akiba, who brought a hellish consequence on his people. It's Akiba, who promoted a false Messiah in Bar Kokhba to counter the influence of the false Messiah that Paul had promoted. And it was by promoting a false Messiah to combat a false Messiah that the Romans came again under Hadrian and destroyed Yahudah, creating the worst part of the diaspora, all of which eventually led to the Holocaust, none of which would have happened without Akiba. And then there is Muhammad. And as we move through our programs together, I will share with you how the very same rabbis that I am speaking against here are the ones who equipped Muhammad with most of the Quran, selling him stories from their Talmud, bringing this beast upon the Jewish people. Well, since these three men were all wrong, and because they were all arrogant and derisive, there is no reason to choose the most Torah adverse. Avoid them all for the sake of your soul. Yahweh chose Dode to lead his people in the past and has chosen to work with him again to reestablish his kingdom in the future, because Dode was Torah observant, because Dode loved his father Yahweh, and that made Dode Sadak right. His second advent was his choice, something which will become evident in due time as we work our way through this first volume of Coming Home, Dode's Mizmor. Regardless of whether you have placed your faith in Paul, Akiba, or Muhammad, in a conspiracy advocating reptilian overlords and government plots, or in political reformers and humanist philosophers, you've been offered a reconciliatory advice from the very Son of God. Focus on the enjoyable and thoughtful aspects of Yahweh's Torah if you would like to spend your eternity with God and with his son Dode. Or you can remain tied to Judaism, Christianity, or God-forsaken Islam, and you can continue to be separated from God. You're Jewish in diaspora, even if you've come home. So while not recommended, many have chosen to follow the example of a rapist and pedophile, a mass murdering and terrorist, the case of Muhammad and Islam. Billions are also jaundiced, such that they believe the rhetoric of the plague of death, according to Yahweh. That would be Shaul, who renamed himself Paul, following him to Sheol, hell. they will become personally acquainted with the thorn in his side when he admitted that he was demon possessed. So the choice is yours. Considering Dode's standing with God, it's hard to explain why so many billions favor the Talmud, New Testament, and the Quran over the Torah. Why is it that the majority of people chase after false gods by romping through man's religious rubbish? Why do so many Jews, Christians, and Muslims claim that the Torah was inspired by God and yet ignore it and abrogate the very words of God? Dode didn't. And if you want to be with him, accept his advice. This is a good place for us to conclude our first program on the Voice, Volume 1 of Coming Home. Asher, my Labrador, is announcing the conclusion of the program. One of these days we'll have fade-out music, but until then, you get the woof of my Labrador. Thank you for listening. This has been the YAHOWAH blog. I am your host, Craig Winn. Good night.